yeah, so like anyway, you know, I've taken time here to provide a more informative presentation that might secure the quality of conveyance and a monotone distribution of information that will maintain the attention of the audience, the performance, the henceforth furthermore. So like I was thinking about, the Surgeon General, okay, and we international and the forecast and thinking about the weather and certain factors, and ultimately it seemed to be thinking about Bureau of Vital Statistics and the footprint on the birth certificate and the preliminary prejudice of product registration of the birth certificate. And the thing about, ultimately it's obviously has led to the thought it seems to have the significance of, yes, a baptism. June 14th, 1992 seemed to be the thing about the Rock Me Amadeus and something about the American religion, the Book of Mormon, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it seemed to be the thing about the SAT thing on a Saturday morning on Flag Day, okay, June 14th, 1992. And the thing with this is that it seemed to me that ultimately, the way it's presented, that the information is ultimately resulted in, like I think it's pretty close to an 18-month period. And there was like a thing about, somewhere in my mind, like a borderline issue and like a sonic boom, okay, that ultimately led to like 3 phone calls, and 6 months later, it seemed to be the thing about, the presidential and all of a sudden like the mandated requirements to participate in a circuit over some African Americans, like 6, the presidential thing, and obviously it's gotten to the real thing about the African Americans 6 being so like 6 and 52 in a VPN. So like in any case, so like like there was like a baptism, okay, June 14th, 1992. Not necessarily identified as a method of banking based upon, previous ideas, a method of banking, not necessarily the idea of a boycott embargo as maybe the thought of maybe interest-bearing participating backers, yeah. So it seemed to be whether or not if really a method of holding as a daily standard transaction bank, some idea of duration that only suggests maybe whether or not if a deed restriction might only be the thought of like loss prevention in the form of like boycott and embargo as a method of holding, a daily standard method of holding of banking. In the international banking system, ultimately the vice president network of the VPN. And once again, yeah, all right, yeah. So like in any case, so like it gets to the thought like of the Surgeon General. Ultimately, it seemed to be the thing about we international and the forecast and weather and the idea of the spore stone and the idea that even Rock Me Amadeus seemed to be the Lincoln Continental Fluid Ornament. The thing about the ohms of resistance and the 8 ohms, predominantly the thing about just the figure 8 as well as like the infinite lines and infinity on a zoom lens of the 8 ohms, and it seemed to be the thing about what the PA is to the initial, the acronym PA being like a presidential announcement, plenipotentiary announcement, or public announcement, or the deal about a PA system and the alphanumerics and all that stuff, or the exact opposite of the PA being like the American press. So like anyway, so like it gets to a lot of information in any case. So I wanted to think about the idea of like something about the after June 14th, 1992, approximately about there was like an 18-month period. The idea of like the sonic boom, and that led to like 3 phone calls at 3 different locations in the Houston, the gallery being one, Greens Point in another, and some idea like somewhere near like a Beamer. Why wouldn't it be Beamer? I mean, we're talking about lasers now, okay? I mean, why wouldn't it be Beamer? Of course, yeah, a 484 number. But ultimately, 6 months later, it had been some idea like some alphanumeric 6 and some like presidential, participating alphanumeric, content and some experience that would maybe be required as maybe an invitation of a demanded participating factor in the circuit. Yeah, like a baptism, like intellectual, like gaining some idea of like meaning and value in administration. That's intellectual, huh? So like henceforth furthermore, okay, all that like, righteousness. I thought maybe I'd include maybe some, idea about, the Surgeon General and what it has meant as some idea of like, being gassed in a specific duration between 1994, 95, and 96. It's like a 6 to 9 month period, okay? And I'm not real sure, I'd mentioned this about like Univision, and I'm not real sure if there's like a period in between that I can account for. I mean, if it actually equates to like a year, or some idea between a calendar year and a fiscal annual, or some idea like between a zodiac and a Chinese calendar. I'd be an Oriental like Japanese is to Pearland, and some idea of the 90 degree of reading Japanese from top to bottom. Ultimately, live auditing of like legal media in quantum of the transparent parameters as compared to the horizontal parameters of like customizing waveform in post-production and editing. Vertically, it's like live, and the parameters are transparent, yet at a certain signal strength are visible. Likewise, in addition with like a 90 degree, like a superimposium type of a effect. I mean, the one other time, like once again, I've seen it is like at Commandos out on the FM 1960 side of Houston. There's some information. It seemed to be, the idea of like that 70 show. It's also, it seemed to be like, Vantage Love 30 is like, secret de facto of the, title of that 70 show is really the thing about, Vantage being like secret de facto, Vantage Love, secret de facto 30. And it seemed to be that thing about Commandos on FM 1960, then that 70 show, and the thing about the 80s. Ultimately, a 13-band graphic equalizer that seemed to be the thing about the pastel colors involving like the history of a television screen. Likewise, even Abraham Lincoln night vision shadow government Stargate program, and the pastel green of ambience and the pastel red of impedance in like night vision were predominantly the only two colors at the time. Now I've been seeing here recently something, I'm not sure if it's considered an amber color, kind of like looking like the University of Texas Longhorns like football jersey kind of color, kind of burnt orange, kind of nod, I'm assuming if that's an amber color, somewhere like in between, kind of orangish burnt or orangish kind of color. Yeah, but anyway, so like in any case, so it seemed to be the thing about the night vision that way, and in any case, so it seemed to be that ultimately, the idea of like a deed restriction has gotten to the point of, and God created woman with one rib of a man. I mean, is it really the deed restriction of a blue ribbon cutting? Grand opening. The blue ribbon. And ultimately, all this information, I'm at the age of 59, and seeing everything that seemed to be so, like, geographically and alphanumerically and biblically and religiously and separation between church and state and politically and National Geographic's international banking systems and international financial management and all this globalization of global positioning systems and VSAT communications and American Amplified of like the alphanumerics of 192 as to like amplification, American Amplified of bandwidth and spectrum, not limited to amplification, but it seemed to be the only thing about the home theater, and what's identified on most home theaters now as the highest potential amplification. And it's, the only thing about the amplification is that I've seen the thing about on Lincoln Continental and like Cadillac, the MKZ and the MK8Z, and I'm not sure if that's actually a difference of like categorization, if it's a power combine of like American Amplified as compared to VSAT communications and powerful application of 192 megakilohertz, or what the real deal is. But I've seen like MKZ and MK8Z like on Cadillac and Lincoln Continental, and likewise in addition, like I mentioned before, like brand new and used, like virtually every make and model of like SUVs was coming through Pearland for a while. This is like back in the 80s, before like 1990. I think even after there was a period that the SUVs coming through Pearland, every one of them, brand new, used, were coming through Pearland with like Z71 on it. And I mentioned before, it seemed to be the only thing about the rectangles that ultimately gives the impression of like laser corrective eye surgery, and it seemed to be the thing about the word plasma being alphanumeric 56 in drum, or the WHY question word, why, WHY being 56, or the thing about paper being 56 and paper made is like 56 is 10, ultimately combining alphanumeric and linguistic and numerical alphanumerical combine of like paper made being like the alphanumerics are for like 94 and annotated adoption and abortion, and like the Roe v. Wade thing. The thing with this is that it seems that Michael Jackson wears that white glove, and if the Abraham Lincoln Night Vision Shadow Government Stargate program is some idea of the white glove being some idea that it's white and 65 and Pepsi, identifying some color code of AT&T, well, there it is, because it seemed to be the thing about the thing about Southwestern Bell, and somewhere in my mind a solid state issue, and how like in 1990 that AT&T took over Southwestern Bell, and Southwestern Bell is really kind of like a thing of the past, and this is like 35 years later in the year 2025, but like in the beginning of like 1990, all the public phones that were blue that normally are identified like inside of like going through the service and governmental structure, the blue phone, identified as a public phone, that's like no longer around to be found. Okay, the thing with this is that it seemed to be the 35 of memory minus de facto, like it's like all like and involving the 35-year thing that is this year, and like what's going on like with my memory, it seemed to be like the screensavers of Microsoft presenting that one screensaver. It had been like over a 4 to 5 year period of like certain sets and groupings of screensavers that I noticed. I saw a specific grouping and setting of several screensavers being presented by Microsoft, and I'd realized that I'd seen it for I think it was each time was like for about maybe for maybe a 6-week period of different sets of groupings of like screensavers that Microsoft was presenting. It was just like happening on my laptop, and then I finally realized that the European Northwest Museum was the location that I was actually taken to. And it seemed to be the thing about, a museum for like dead people. The thing with it is that years later, like when I started talking about it and realizing like a bunch about YouTube had been participating factors of like the memory minus de facto, and I was actually beginning to realize that memory had been an issue, and I didn't even really know that it was, and realizing that the memory was kind of like, being rejuvenated over like certain factors of participating world news and national news presenting what seemed to be like, hey, do you remember kind of like thing. Even YouTube that way, and I was like realizing certain factors about, certain things about that, and it seemed to be like a bunch of white and gold videos involving Egypt and the thing about Europe, and some idea of like a color code, and ultimately, the thing about an appraisal of a resurrection, and ultimately it involved, a color coded uniform. It seemed to be, if it's all three of like North and South Korea and China, but there was like a particular guy, and I'm not sure where I was at. But what I'm saying is that when I'm talking about the Stargate program, that's really all I'm going to be talking about. Truthfully, is either music video, lighting, and me and my drums, and getting to my original music. But it seemed to be the thing about like right now, on and on about a duration of like the lifespan of like intellectual. Getting to it only seems to be like whether or not if the whole entire issue, like as frustrating as it may seem, getting to my original music and getting my thing going, it's ultimately going through the Stargate program. It seemed to be like the forecast of like preliminary prejudice, a product registration of a birth certificate, and the thing about God created woman with one rib of a man, and ultimately, I mean, is it really the restriction of a blue ribbon grand opening? I mean, it's the blue ribbon. I mean, by now, I mean, if it's not the code blue, and really if there's an idea of the horizontal parameters, above and below the 6-point star of the Israeli flag, being some idea as a point of origin of Christianity, yet Israel is 64 alphanumerically, and American likewise in addition, HTTP, and the colon or the ratio thing about, the double forward slash. And it seemed to be that even the hockey stick is at, which seemed to be, in my mind, like a 22.5 degree, although the hockey stick is identified as 135 degree. To me it's 22.5, and an angle of like a double forward slash. the hockey stick is 135 degrees, divided by 22.5 is 6, and repeatedly it seemed to be, the presidential number, numerically and alphanumerically. And actually, I'd realized that when I was like looking for that, it's kind of like onto that thing about the alphanumerics of 6. I'd realized that repeatedly I was looking for ways of finding 6 that way. And before I'd even realized it, I actually recognized and realized that I was using 4 different methods of computation to achieve the numerical and alphanumeric value of 6. And it's like I did it, and I realized that I'd actually used 4 different methods before I even consciously acknowledged it in my mind that had already happened several times. In any case, so yeah, so it seemed to be like something about that. But anyway, so ultimately, the alphanumeric of 6 became a big deal in that way, or even the World Trade Center being ultimately in my mind a 1995 issue, yet presented as like 2001, a 6-year difference. And my thing about ABC 13 Houston to ABC 7 in Los Angeles is a difference of 6. Likewise, once again, from Theodore to Franklin Roosevelt, is 6 presidential terms in office, and in my mind it seemed to be really ultimately the Roosevelt New Deal Act, and being 88, and in my mind, as the New Deal is like 64, New Deal Act is like 88. And the difference between 64 and like 88 seems to be the thing of like Oldsmobile Delta 88, or the carbon footprint, or California Angels. New Deal Act being 88 is automatically like now like a Mormon thing in California. Although it seemed to be like Moses, it's like a political science drum major, getting the 10 Commandments etched on 2 tablets by center point energy with like a lightning bolt, and Moses coming down with like the 10 Commandments in the form of Texas, New Mexico power here in Pearland. Moses being 71 in Pearland and in Babylon, and coming to Pearland with like but remember the Alamo, okay? It's kind of like, you gotta be kidding me. So like all this is going on, and like Moses like really like a political science drum major, and is it the conduct report they're looking for? It's kind of like, you gotta be kidding me. And it's kind of like now it seems to be the thing about Wyatt Earp and John Wayne. Likewise, in addition, with Moses coming down, and the thing about Wyatt Earp, and Earp being the exclusionary rule provision, and like executive powers of sovereign immunities and governmental amnesties, and like even Diners Club of Wyatt and Wyatt's Cafeteria, and even the thing about Hopsing, which is predominantly in between like in John Wayne and Wyatt Earp's deal, and the thing about Pepe, and Hopsing, it seemed to be the thing about ultimately the walk, and J. Edgar Hoover being amphibious about the walk, the jaywalk, and what jaywalking is and is not. It seemed to be the thing about the Mugu Gaipan, even the wearing apparel of a baptism. John Lennon and Yoko Ono about that Mugu Gaipan in the walk and the jaywalk. It's almost like wearing apparel of a baptism. And the thing about all the egg whites, and the Yoko Ono, John Lennon and Yoko Ono about the egg whites. It's ultimately the thing about J. Edgar Hoover in my mind of being amphibious in a jaywalk. It's not a jaywalk, and the thing about a jaywalk is kind of like not a jaywalk. It's kind of like amphibious, and what the walk is, and it's like Wyatt Earp being like the idea of Diners Club and Quantum in military and the alphanumeric 107. And the remember the Alamo seemed to be the thing. Really, ultimately, Santa Claus coming down the chimney with a bag of gifts is almost like the Abraham Lincoln night vision. And center, and most coming down, with center point energy, engraving, the 10 Commandments in the form of like Texas, New Mexico power, and Region 1 regaining some idea, beyond some like idea like space is the final frontier. Yeah, a journey through both space and time to boldly go where no man has gone before, and realize that something about center point energy and like reliant energy has presented an issue that seemed to be that center point energy smart meter has been used as like Region 0, and like presented like really an awareness. Center point energy being used as Region 0, and like no one's had anything to say about it. So why is that? Is it like a religious experience, a mood altering religious experience, and or is it really Agent 99 and some PG-13 rating, And Agent 99, so get smart, get Maxwell smart. I mean, for real, it seemed to be the Texas New Mexico Power, and Moses is like a political science drum major coming down from the plateau with the Ten Commandments in the form of Texas New Mexico Power. And, Moses, regaining control and returning, the rightful ownerships to Pearland and Babylon, in the form of Texas New Mexico Power regaining control of Region 1. And, some idea like, carbon footprint and absentee voting up for grabs is some like, bartering, trading, negotiating tool, device, and mechanism, having some idea of like a banana split for a homing device. Between, Ulysses S. Grant, doing some hopscotch technology between two 9-hole golf courses. Some idea like a student loan combined with a Pell Grant. Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, it gets to whether or not if the PG-13 rating is ultimately some idea of a presidential governor and parental guidance in the Pro Golf Association only presenting the idea. There's some idea of like some idea of like, hey, I like to Sprite, are you sure? So like anyway, it seemed to be the Michael Jackson thing that ultimately seemed to be ultimately getting to the movie Ben. I think that the name of the movie is Ben, and like he sang the song Ben, but now it's like the venue of Geneva, Switzerland, human civil rights, and it seemed to be a thing about going through a circuit and becoming like some idea of like being itemized beyond a K9 unit of television programming, and not the issue of a kernel being a kennel. I mean, in computer programming, okay, there's a kernel, okay, and the thing about the white language, okay, and Michael Jackson, he wears that white glove, okay. Although Ajax is 36 like Chase and a telepathic TP, the language, Ajax, it's like the white thing. It's like the Alpha Max of 36. Let me think about it real quick. What's that, 11, 12? It's 36, yeah. It's like the white language involving like the kernel. And what the deal is about Abraham Lincoln, Night Vision, Shadow Government, Stargate program, is ultimately whether or not the telekinetic role of the pen is really the issue with the kernel. I mean, it seemed to be like the Chevrolet Corvette thing about the veterinarian. Trump talked about, extreme vetting. The thing with this is that, it seemed to be really ultimately about the telekinetic role of the pen. There's some idea of Pinocchio. And, HTTP colon double / and it's ultimately, thing about the back-to-back. Symmetrical, asymmetrical thing about I can't believe it's butter. And it's because I can't believe it's Subway. And I can't believe it's Quiznos because I can't believe it's Pinocchio. Only to discover that Annette Penicillo, yes, it's true. Annette Penicillo, yeah, it's really Pinocchio, yeah. So like any case, so like it gets to quite a bit of information about that. But I was wanting to mention something, and I want to stay on track about the Surgeon General and something I did, like going through a 6 to 9 month period. And I want to focus on a Boolean real quick because it seemed to be whether if you envision using 3 pastels in the black in the beginning and 3 pastels in a white towards the end, wherever they are, they're probably all around this area. It was like located on like West Loop 610 at Highway 59. Highway 59 being Alpha America 140 in Pearland, Texas, attenuation, and ultimately, that deal about waveform, and ultimately, even live auditing with vertical parameters in quantum and all that stuff about, live editing in quantum that way. Not necessarily the idea of like horizontal parameters in like post-production as editing. Yeah, so like any case, so like it seemed to be the thing about that. But anyway, it seemed that ultimately, the initials SG being Stargate and Surgeon General and the Spore Stone, it seemed to be, the idea of like all that information that combines some idea of like Michael Jackson and the band and being venue, because the way the memory's really happening in my mind is that the being venue is like one of the locations that's identified as the BEIN without the G. It's like 30 and like Vantage love 30 and Secret de facto 30. In my mind, it seemed to be like going through a circuit, becoming some idea of like itemized as human capital beyond a K9 unit. It seemed to be the deal about K television. And it really seemed to be really whether or not if the kernel and some idea, I mean, it's defined as a partition, not ad seg or administrative segregation. It's identified as a partition. it doesn't really identify whether or not if it's just an internal memory file, whether if the kernel and the kernel is on the idea of a telekinetic roll of the pen, or some idea of like a file that is actually produced as a secured access based upon administrative designation. Is what that partition really only seems to be about, involving the kernel. I mean, if it's ultimately getting to the thought of the relation between like architecture and platform, ultimately whether or not if some idea of the ethnic background is ultimately some idea of the color of money, or some embedding encryption as a method of banking, or not, or some idea of a degree level, what McDonald's golden arches of both half cycles being above, although gold represents the meaning of, price of gold going up and down, like half cycle above and half below. And it seemed to be a thing about, like, once again, Jesus said he knew before the foundations of the earth, and it seemed to be a thing about the pronunciation of that half cycle, above and below, above the end, applied to, like, OSHA, Occupational Safety Health Administration, being the ocean, and the spore stone. The thing about the spore stone in OSHA, in the ocean, it seemed to be almost like that Hillsong in Ocean's Deep, where feet may fail. I mean, it almost seems to be like the Deep Star 6 in the spore stone as a color code of constitutional law being black, or space exploration of state statutes annotated, and some idea of like the color code of sprite, like the spritiness, like the jurisprudence with the black back in warehousing linked to real estate. I mean, it seemed to be the only thing about monetary and domestic. I mean, that way it seemed to be those two of like state statutes and like constitutional law identifying jurisprudence with the black back. And it seemed to be the thing of like, a deed restriction as like a television programming, a medical power of attorney using a fiction real estate as a deed restriction. It really seemed to be the monetary and domestic thing of even like Sarbanes and Oxley, financial instruments and SOX compliance, and the monetary and domestic side of the aggregates, it seemed to be right there. And the thing about the saying, I like a Sprite in you, and the two different shades of pastels of Sprite, likewise British Petroleum, and even Mountain Dew presents, the two shades of pastel green. And it seemed to be the monetary and domestic side of the aggregates. It seemed to be more so involving, more so of neighborhoods, not necessarily the commercial venue, a living quarter. And, the thing about, not 240 volts, like, there's sometimes automatic of a stationary engineer participating factor of like a commercial venue, or, high-rise building, where a depreciation is normally not even heard of in commercial venue because of the fact of like stationary engineering, and, the deal about, thoroughly, completely taken care of in that way. And that seemed to be the 240 volt thing about, the euro dollar, and the thing about the euro dollar and the US dollar, and the meaning, I guess, of the haloed side of the symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS, and the euro, the haloed euro thing about, a new accomplice, and that little haloed side, symbolic representation between the C and the PTIS, minus the word transfiguration. 204 minus 192 being 12, or region 1 and region 2. It seemed to be the thing really, even ultimately combined being 3, would still be the 56 alphanumerics like a drum, or, the question why, or ultimately, even just the numeric value of 3 itself, and symbolically, like Mercedes. But anyway, it seemed to be, all this information that I was thinking about, because it seemed to be the forecast in the spore stone that links, the deed restriction is ultimately, like God created woman with one rib of a man. Is it ultimately getting to the blue ribbon cutting of a grand opening? Here I'm 59 years of age, and living in, like, any neighborhood, it's just, like, obviously proven to be, like, really kind of, like, not my idea of, like, cool, like, at all. It's just not the grade that really, a commercial venue, living quarter, all about, audio production and everything about it, and not limited to, and yeah, Wade Bank International, like Airing Skies about, and yeah, annuities, yeah, and the Visions Tower Power, yeah, 75 floors, of course, yes, and yeah, 3 of them, likewise, in addition, 25 years, And Airmark Arena, yeah, maximum seat capacity of 26,000. Yeah, Highway 288 thing about it. Yeah, so like anyway, there's like, yeah, like I've got like a lot going on in my mind. Yeah, so like yeah, so like anyway, and like the Hill HX50 helicopter, yeah, and all that, flight simulation and all the equipment and the hangars, yes, upright, yes, right, great, yeah. So making a great beyond like local area internet protocol, local area network of maritime law seemed to be, like quite a bit about, J. Edgar Hoover that way in American Idol. But I'm trying to stay focused on the thing about the Surgeon General, the Stargate program, because it seemed to be somehow in my mind, Univision, it presents, the 6 pastels, and there was like a 6 to a 9 month period, and I'm not sure if it's really even a year. But I mean, there seems to be like whether or not if the idea of like the 3 pastels in a black, like a black dot drumhead, or black hole space exploration, or just the color code of constitutional law or state statutes annotated. And an Aquarian Power White Dot seemed to be the only drumhead being like, the only drumhead is seemed to be, the hypothetical metaphor at the same time, yet amphibious above maritime law, yet, it seemed to be the pastel that can be used as a pastel. It doesn't have to be, or not required to be, and is not a pastel. And it seemed to be a thing about making a grade beyond maritime law of, actually, some idea of a dimensional clause or some access transition of, even what color white means, even to an Aquarian Power White Dot drumhead. It seemed to be a thing about, pastel being 73 in Harrison, Egypt, and Israeli, and what that is to the history of the television screen, and the transition from analog to digital. I mean, it seemed to be the issue of, like, really the color code of the space shuttle being black and white, or, Holy Seagull with 2 L's being 137 in Clear Lake, Texas, and Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center. And it seemed to be the thing, really, about the color code. I mean, if the ratio between the Space Shuttle and the Holy Seagull is the actual color of monochrome in the history of television screen, or the silver silk screen, or the thought of, like, silver bells, or, the thing about the silver silk screen in monochrome, it seemed to be, really, I mean, is it really the ratio? And I'm going to take some time to actually find out if it's the actual ratio, or if it's just one, or just like the demanded standard as the ratio of the silver silk screen and monochrome of like the history of television screen, going through the pastels and Technicolor and the living color thing about it. Yeah, so like anyway, so like it seems to be like already the thing about the Surgeon General that seemed to be involving way international, or the forecast in that way, because it seemed to be, like for a 6 to 9 month period. Okay, I'm going to slow down so I won't like repeat myself more than I've been doing here, like real like immediately. Yeah, but anyway, so like and I woke up, I noticed a difference in length in my arm, but I didn't even know it was like my humerus bone at the time. And then when I realized it's like the humerus bone between my shoulder and elbow, it's like 4 inches on both sides. Are like where'd he go? Obviously I noticed a difference, but I mean, there was no pain, no cast, no stitches. I mean, it was like some seriously intense incoherence, and even being able to count for some of it. And I'm kind of wondering if Univision presenting the 3 pastels and the black in the beginning, 3 pastels of black, is similar to the Boolean chart in the West Wing of the White House, sequencing characterization in sets of 6. It seemed to be that the W and the G of the B in venue, or like Michael Jackson singing that song Ben, and B in being like the Alpha 30 and without the G. And it seemed to be Michael Jackson's initials being 23, and something about him singing that song Ben is the WG applied to the Boolean chart, which has symbolic representation that even the Stargate program, the SG, and like Surgeon General seem to be, in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word is God, then God said, let there be light. And really more and more it seems to be, really automatically it's like the current resident, like, for real, for LASIK laser corrective eye surgery out on the west side of Houston. And the thing about, the pronunciation, like LA and the number 6 being SIX and a VPN and all kinds of alphanumerics, and it seemed to be more and more becoming, the thing about that in the beginning was the Word was God, and the Word is God, then God said let there be light. And it seemed to be, I mean, the current resident, and I mean the coupon, I mean the one. In any case, so like it seemed to be like almost like the Michael Jackson thing, the ML, I mean MJ being 23, and Ben, and the B in venue being 30, It seemed to be that song. It's like the human civil rights issue of human capital, of investment terminology that seemed to be like going through a circuit on Bluebird, getting put on an Airbus H160 in the color code of AT&T, and how I got to Geneva, Switzerland at the B&B venue and like a couple other locations. I'm not real sure, although I do remember the Airbus and very not much of it, the white and black one. Yet there was a blue one. Like I said previously earlier, that I'm not even sure if it was the same location or the same day, but there's like a blue Airbus like doing a 360, and I think both of them were tennis courts. I'm not real sure if they were both, but they were square, doing like a pi r square. I mean, for real, like a radius doing like, you know, finding the diameter of a pi r square, blue Airbus, a bank bus, a 1992 based on the birth year of 1964, or, you know, some idea like a June 14th, 1992 deal about, you know, the alphanumerics of, I mean, Six Flags baptism, for real. All the way, you know, getting to the thought of like the memory, you know, 25, 30 years later, realizing that memory minus the fact had been obviously some extremely intense incoherence, and more so a vision than even comprehensible thought process of like language. Only the memory of the vision, it was like the late Six Flags, and I knew that area, but previously that building was not identified with any rectangle, but it being the one word plaza, it just seemed to have the significance of a bicentennial drummer in the alphanumerics of 200 and James Null unit, and ultimately, you know, the thing about, you know, the Permian Basin being the idea of like the Bureau of Statistics and the footprint of a birth certificate, yet a white footprint, and yet the plateau, and the thing about, you know, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the Atonement, or even Michael Jackson and the Billie Jean thing about, you know, hopscotch technology, and even John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever, and, you know, all the idea of an atonement and choreography, and Michael Jackson saying about the toes, because, I mean, you know, anyone that has any maritime law, you know, knowledge will automatically know that towing is like, you know, guiding, you know, huge ships to ports, and like, and the port of Houston, it being like the biggest shipment of like Chevrolet Geo Prism and Hyundai Excel. It seemed to be the thing about, you know, the B&B venue and the Airbus, and some idea beyond the Bluebird bus going through the circuit. And it seemed to be, you know, the Hyundai Excel thing about excelling, and I've heard it, you know, excel above the rest. So it seemed to be the Airbus thing about that, yet it seemed to be the color code of AT&T, and I'm not sure if I was even on. And that might be the only thing about processing in the current events of that Airbus H160 doing a circle in motion. I mean, if that's the idea, like, you know, still going, like right now, about that long ago, and the memory during what seemed to be, you know, during 1994, 95, and 96, for a 6 to 9 month period that really may even be a year long. And I'm thinking that if it is anything more than 9 months, some idea of like Univision and the 3 pastels in the black, then 3 pastels in the white, and something about the Boolean chart, because it seemed to be that it uses 0 and 1, I think, although I know it's sequencing characterization in sets of 6. And Michael Jackson sang about ultimately the B&B venue and the alphanumerics of 6, and it seemed to be that the W and the G involving Michael Jackson, his initials being 23, and the G about his song Ben, and the B in venue, and the G's not in it, although the alphanumerics of like what Vantage Love 30 is to like B-E-I-N in B in venue of human civil rights. It seemed to be the thing about, like I said, going through the circuit, becoming some idea of like, you know, itemized of like human capital, more so on the expenditure side of the uniform. I mean, if that's a grade of alphanumerics, so then, you know, something about me being on an Airbus, and I'm not sure if that's actually how I got to Geneva, Switzerland, but I mean, I'm knowing that I mean, that would obviously be the helicopter that would go the distance. If not, if there's a need to like land on a ship with a landing pad, that was one of them. And yet the blue one, it seemed to be like now as a memory, the color code of like AT&T and what it seemed to be about from 1990. Although Brazoria is 90, and in Pearland, Texas, the thing with this, it seemed to be like likewise in addition, the movie, you know, The Right Stuff, and like a 90-degree right angle, the movie about space exploration and like astronauts. I'm not sure if cosmonauts are actually in the movie, and along with the idea about that particular movie, The Right Stuff, But it seemed to be, like the word stuff is like 59, and like the right stuff is normally the idea of a 90-degree right angle. And Highway 59 being the thing about parallel Texas and 140 alphanumerics and like attenuation, and it goes on and on, holy miracles, and ultimately, the U.S. thing applied to 140 being Houston, Texas Electronic Power and We International Selective Service. I mean, it just, has all the connectivity of that movie, the right stuff being like a 90-degree right angle, yet the alphanumerics of 59 being the 90-degree right stuff is like, I'm at the age of 59 now here in Pearland. I'm in my home in a tent, in the cathedral part of the home. And it's been experiencing some real serious issues, and I'm not finding it very amusing. Seem to be the depreciation is some idea of like not funny crap going on right now. The thing it is that's my motivation even more so about a commercial venue. And it seems to be really, if the issue is like the monetary and domestic side of whether or not, if Roosevelt New Deal Act is on the idea of whether if the Boolean chart is representing that W and G of Michael Jackson or even George W. Bush, or what the three ingredients seem to be at the beginning. It seemed to be the transition from William Jefferson Clinton and Al Gore, and obviously Chevy Chase at the 1992 presidential inaugural ball. The thing with this is at the end of President William Jefferson's term in office and the transition to the George Bush thing, like I mentioned before, it seemed to be about a 5, maybe 6 year period that I'd realized that I hadn't seen added preservatives and byproducts, and backtracked it, like pretty close to the beginning of the George Bush administration. And that seemed to be the thing about Michael Jackson, and his initials being 23 and Dr. Pepper, or ultimately, even a deed restriction, if DR being Dr. Pepper, the DR of deed restriction, or the alphanumerics of DR being like a 22 or FDIC or RCA. It seems to be whether or not if loss prevention is the only issue, more so of like monetary and domestic, like a deed restriction in television programming, and how jurisprudence with a black back is like someone saying, "Hey, I like the Sprite in you." I don't like to see anyone really even see the one word. It seemed to be only of warehousing, the one word. It seemed to be the only one out of the entire deal about state statutes annotation of warehousing, of jurisprudence with a black back, of that one word repudiation involving real estate, in the same state statutes annotated that identify the idea of whether if appreciation or depreciation is only a medical power of attorney using fixed and real estate. Even the thought of even a blue ribbon cutting issues, in the beginning, God created woman with one rib of a man. With one rib of a man. God created woman with one rib from a man. I mean, it's ultimately that the preliminary prejudice of product registration, of a birth certificate, of the Surgeon General. I mean, ultimately, is it the blue ribbon cutting at the age of 59? I'm pretty close to getting close to being the age of 60 now. I mean, all just Highway 59 being 140 in Pearland, Texas, and my age based upon my birth year of 1964, and Univision and Highway 59, West Loop 610, and Highway 59, and all that's going on in my mind. It seemed to be, the Boolean chart of 6 in characterization is sets of 6, like the 3 pastels in the black and the 3 pastels in the white of Univision. It seemed to be, really in the beginning, the Word was God and the Word is God, and God said, "Let there be light." It seemed to be for that 6 to 9 month period, going through the Stargate program. I'm not sure if there would be some idea of the Boolean chart, 6 in characterization and sets of 6, that would actually equate to maybe like a 1 year, whether it's the idea of a calendar year or a fiscal annual, or a zodiac involving a Chinese calendar, ultimately Japanese, being like a 90-degree, reading from top to bottom as compared to English from left to right. The 90-degree of language that way right here in Pearland about Japanese being 7-1 in Pearland. So, I mean, it seemed to be whether or not if really Univision is presenting some idea of the alphanumerics of 6, yet some idea even the World Trade Center, in my mind, automatically 1995, yet it presents it being presented as a 2001 issue in a difference of 6, or J.D. Powers, somewhere in a vice president network, of an entire lifetime of just watching television, of available information, the way it's being presented. So like, okay, so like it's already going on like 45 minutes. And it seemed to be whether or not if the W and the G applied or not applied. I mean, recognizably, the G is not there in being. And human capital, investment terminology, it seemed to be automatically, investment terminology, going beyond the idea as itemization. Beyond the Bluebird bus and being the Airbus thing about, 28 bus, based upon a birth year, or the thought of like an American or Israeli, or the thing about HTTP : as computer programming and language, identifying an American that way, or a birth year, or the alphanumerics of 64, seemed to be the thing really that seemed to be whether or not if the deed restriction of would be the ultimate deed restriction, or is it really loss prevention as the deed restriction of God made woman with one rib of a man? Normally, a lot of grand openings are referred to as a blue ribbon cutting. Is it because everyone else, like is that a political science major? Is that they haven't had one rib, and woman was not made from one rib of a degree level of like something that would present maybe something more so of commercial venue of living quarters? I mean, is that really the only deed restriction of a medical power of attorney, identifying who has had one rib removed, or who created woman with one rib of a man? Or is it really the preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate that's really the thought of a blue ribbon cutting of importing and exporting, some idea of a commercial venue of living quarters, and what the alphanumerics 202 in Washington D.C. is to an eternal treasury? I mean, ultimately, it seemed to be whether or not if a preliminary prejudice of product registration of a birth certificate is ultimately some idea of the spore stone being used in orthopedic surgery. And the thing about GMC raising a bar, okay? I mean, ultimately, I mean for real. So, like, what's that supposed to mean? Okay, 4 inches on both sides of my arm of the humerus bone had been removed, and like I was asleep, and I woke up and didn't even realize. I mean, a lot of intense stuff was like really happening for a 6 or 9 month period, if not a year. I'm not sure if the thing about Univision and the 3 pastels in white, 3 pastels in black and 3 pastels in white presents some duration of neutrality that would represent Geneva, Switzerland, is known to be neutral. I mean, if that's something about a 3 month period, from a 9 month to a 12 month, or maybe a 6 month, or somewhere in between a 6 to a 9 month period, a period presenting Geneva, Switzerland of the being venue as neutral, that would be some idea of Univision of the 3 pastels in a black and the 3 pastels in white, and the 6 in characterization is sets to 6 of the Boolean chart, and the being venue not having a G. It's like the noticeable thing about the Michael Jackson thing, and ultimately, Pepsi in a white glove, and the thing about, a white glove being like, a white miracle, or the thing about, some idea of like a news being 61. It's almost like the Colonel being identified as the white language involving Ajax with the white glove, and Michael Jackson seemed to be the thing about the Colonel, and whether or not if the whole idea of the Colonel being a kennel is beyond the canine unit of television programming. I mean, is that ultimately getting to like any neighborhood? It's ultimately that has a tree. I mean, is it why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns can be used as subject? I mean, is that really, truthfully, honestly, like a dog pissing on a tree? I mean, for real, okay? And the list goes on and on about, why one pronoun, the 4 types of pronouns, can be used as a subject. I mean, ultimately, is it really? Excuse me. Woman was created by one rib of a man. Is it ultimately, the pronoun? Why one pronoun of the 4 types of pronouns can be used as a subject? Or is it really exactly the opposite? The only one that's going to be used as a subject? I mean, like, does anyone know the difference? Who knows anyway form? I mean, is it really the exact opposite that way of intelligence and opposite as compared to Pentagon, reserve, and reverse involving a drummer? I mean, ultimately, is it that a deed restriction is just an X-ray? involving, you know, the Surgeon General at the time of birth of a footprint, and like a bunch of graphite, and identifying, you know, obviously from, you know, a footprint of a newborn child to like biometrics involving, you know, some alignment on a wall, and some color code of like, you know, international financial management, and like a Lincoln Continental hood ornament, some 90-degree as a scale of a misappropriation allocation to Mississippi, identifying some like, you know, colon as a ratio and double forward slash, and it seemed to be really Lockheed Martin in that fifth dimension eccentric 5 triangle, identifying like something about the Transco Tower turned to the Williams Tower, and ultimately the Allied Bank at Milam, you know, and the upside of the high-rise thing of Milam, and Allied Bank turned to Wells Fargo, ultimately to the Williams Tower. I mean, it's almost like the Lockheed Martin, and reading the 5 eccentric triangle of the exact opposite that I mentioned as like the atonement of 232, being like, you know, Green Acres, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and reading it analytically, I mean, and describing it would be a 232 idea. In my mind, it's like an atonement. It seemed to be almost like a requirement of an atonement, and the exact opposite of that being 323 in the area code of Los Angeles, and likewise all that stuff about, you know, Z71 and Chevrolet Silverado being like telepathic brainwaves, and hopefully the Z71 a Paraline. But anyway, yeah, so like it's already going on like 51 minutes, and I think, you know, I want to try and keep that Boolean chart in mind about the being venue and Michael Jackson with that movie Ben and the song Ben, and what the being venue is to like secret de facto 30, and, you know, apply to the Boolean chart, and it seemed to be the West Wing of the White House, and the prefix of the White House, 4, 5, and 6, and the California Angels and the Blue Angels, so, you know, the jet formations of 4, 5, and 6 jet formation. Apply to like the Boolean chart and the Blue Wing. Yeah, so like it's open, you know, all that it seemed to be like right now. And I'm probably going to take a look at it to maybe decide if I want to do a little bit of analytical between the Stargate thing, about some analytical and symbolic stuff about it. But anyway, I'm going to take a break. I'm already kind of like, yeah, so like that's where I'm at with like, you know, the way I think about it right now. So like, yay, there it is, okay?